Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to the Football Diary podcast. It's International Week, and we're taking this opportunity not necessarily to look at how England performed, although we will get there eventually. It's actually a good time to take stock and look at the Premier League season so far, look at who's the winners and who's the losers, which clubs we fear about, which club, which player are actually performing better or worse than expected, and potentially our player of the season so far. And then we'll talk about England and their time coming under Lee Carsley coming to an end. But before that, first order of business, a big welcome back to Myles to the pod. He's been away for a few weeks. He's okay. His life's turned upside down a little bit. He's become a father. So congratulations, Myles, mate. How's it feeling?
Thanks, mate. It's amazing, yeah. It's been fantastic. It's annoying that Villa have done incredibly poorly ever since the little one came. I've had him in his Villa colours already. He's not seen us win yet. So hopefully that'll change soon.
I was going to say a weird timing there. As soon as the little one arrived, the results started turning down a little bit for Villa, didn't they? So a bit of a strange one for you. But welcome back to the pod, man.
Thanks, man.
What have you seen so far from the football that you've missed? Have you seen any football that's made you sort of catch your eye or made you stand up and take notice?
We've kept up with it. We've definitely kept up with it. We were watching the Villa throughout, and it's been nice to kind of share those moments. But it's just disappointing that it's kind of come just before that international break that seems to throw everyone off. It felt like a lot of teams were ready for this break, didn't it? There was injuries creeping into a lot of squads. The league table became really congested. You started to see that all of a sudden that picture was a lot less clear of who was going to fall where. I think we'll be one of the big beneficiaries of having that break as long as we get most of our squad back. Although apparently Anana and Konta have picked up injuries on the break, so that's frustrating.
Yeah, the pitfalls of international break. But as I said in the intro, guys, let's talk about the Premier League first. 11 games in. I think it's a really interesting time to reflect. We always look at like the Christmas break traditionally as a time to go, who's in the title race, who's doing well, who's not. But I think this international break feels like a bit of a natural break in play for clubs, like you say, Myles, who desperately need it, for some players who are bang out of form. So let's start there, shall we, Dave? Let's look at the players or the clubs that you think are doing well so far, like a surprise for you, club or player. Who have you got as your sort of biggest standout in a good way?
I think one for me, and this is, I kind of wanted to move away from looking at the top six so much, but this is a player I feel as though he's lacked minutes. I think particularly last season and coming from Arsenal, I think it was a big signing for Fulham and Myles Smith-Rowe. I think since he's gone there, his contribution has been outstanding, and he's built a really good relationship with that and it's great to see him enjoying his football again. I don't think it's a surprise as such because we know the talent that he is, but it's more of a reminder. I think he's given this reminder of how good he can be at times, and it's great to see him as he's one of their talisman at the moment. So I think that's 4 goals as well so far, and 5 contributions I think so far this season. So yeah, it's great to see.
Before we move on to your pick, Myles, let's look at Smith-Rowe quickly, because I think one of the last times I chatted to you on the pod was with Isaac, Arsenal fan Isaac, who was kind of looking at Fulham and their ex-Arsenal players and them doing so well with a bit of pride. And Smith-Rowe had a lot of pressure on his shoulders, didn't he, with that price tag? It's their record signing after all. But I'm surprised really at how quickly he's hit the ground running. Are you?
I don't know if I'll be surprised at how quickly he's done it, because it was always going to be the case that actually in a team where he was expected to be the talisman and kind of had a bit more focus. Sorry, I've just kicked my phone off my table. It was always going to be the case that in a team where he was expected to be the talisman and have a bit more focus on him, he would have the freedom to lead it a bit more, and he was never going to get that at Arsenal. So seeing him kind of take that opportunity with both hands at Fulham is amazing. It's the irony is, looking at the last few games when Odegaard's been out injured, Arsenal could have really done with him, and he would have fitted in really well into that squad. So hopefully it gives him a real boost in his career. And actually, he's one that I'm surprised that Carsley didn't look at a bit more, because he was looking at trying to bring a lot of young players through, and Smith-Rowe's been there or thereabouts before and is in good form. So I thought maybe he might be one that got a look in, but that will come, I think, if he keeps going the way he's been.
Yeah, he's not really seen as a prospect anymore, is he? He's a very established Premier League player. I think that's the difference. And he's still got a lot to offer at international level. I don't doubt his time will come, but we'll talk about England in a moment, no doubt. Who's on your list then, mate, as the biggest surprise in a positive way? Is it a club or is it a player?
It's a club with a combination of players. I think Brentford, really. I think the way that they've performed so far. Okay, they're 11th in the league, which might be par for the course for them. But I think we all kind of anticipated a bit of a drop-off with Ivan Toney moving on. And actually, the league positions all feel a bit false right now, don't they? Because it's so congested. But their performance has been fantastic. They've been really, really good going forward, a bit more shaky at the back. But they're being incredibly well led by Wissa and Mbeumo, who are filling in for Tony's goals incredibly well. Wissa's already on 7 goals this season, and Mbeumo's on 8. Now, he's only ever... His highest goal scoring season ever, and Mbeumo, was in League 2 in France, and he got 10. So he's already like on track to smash that out of the water. I think Ivan Toney got 20 Premier League goals in one season, and that's Brentford's record. He could go on and beat that as well, the way that he's playing. But the two of them, the connection they seem to have, the fact that they're just willing to keep making that step up and show up in those moments when Brentford really need them, I think it's outstanding. And Thomas Frank is someone that I think we've always talked about as whether we expect him to kind of move on to someone else after Brentford, look for that next step up. But instead, it's just seems like he's desperate to try and take Brentford to the next step himself rather than look for it at another club. And the way they've been going this season, how congested that area of the league is and how difficult it seems to be for anyone to get a run of form together, he could surprise people. They could sneak into a European place, and it wouldn't necessarily be down to anything other than that attacking prowess that they've got.
Yeah, big surprise, because I think we both said they were borderline relegation candidates, dare I say. Like if things didn't go their way, they could slide quite quickly, especially without Tony. But those fears have been allayed a bit quite comfortably with goals especially. But Dave, Brentford, you've always been kind of a big fan of Thomas Frank, haven't you? And I think we've said on a few times on this pod, especially last week, we were saying about that block of teams that are from sort of 3rd down to 13th. Brentford are kind of amongst that now, aren't they, in some ways? And you could see them either climbing up to Europe or getting drawn into relegation, depending on how the league goes. But they've got such a solid foundation, Brentford. Apart from the players that Myles mentioned, has anyone else stood out for you for them, or is it just a case of them being greater than the sum of their parts?
I agree. I think Wissa's definitely one it's probably taken a lot of people by surprise. I think of how well he's been able to contribute in terms of his numbers. I think I saw something the other day that if you take penalties out of the equation, I think he's actually had as many goals or a similar sort of contribution to what Ivan Toney has had in the past, because we know how many penalties Ivan Toney's had. So I think that's quite impressive in itself. It shows that he's there that he can obviously he can finish. You know, he's that kind of player. I think he's got that kind of nasty streak to him, hasn't he? And I think you'd hate to face him as a defender because he just puts himself about a bit.
Oh, he's tenacious.
He's so committed. But yeah, he's really actually, I think, coming on. I think even more this season. I think it's great to see him actually come into the limelight and out of those shadows a little bit.
Yeah, I think you've just talked, both of you, about clubs and players that are outside of the top 6, traditional top 6 as well, which is great. And I'm going to continue that trend as well with my pick for sort of biggest surprise, and that's Chris Wood. And this is in a team in Nottingham Forest who, I mean, we have to talk about them on this pod, don't we? We've got so many sort of listeners that are Forest fans, but to give them their dues, they deserve it this season, that for the right reasons. The whole of the last couple of seasons has been so up and down for them. And I never in a million years thought Chris Wood would be spearheading this attack, but he is the focal point for a group of very talented attacking players in Forest's lineup, isn't he? And somehow scoring goals in ways that I didn't expect him to score goals in, because he's such a tall, kind of burly player, isn't he, that you don't sort of expect him to score some of the finishes that he's been producing. But his finishing's got so much better this season. 8 goals in 11 games so far, Myles. We've heard about what Dave thinks about Chris Wood in previous pods, but since you've been away, what have you thought about his performances for Forest?
I think you hit the nail on the head when you say he's not the player we expected to be spearheading this attack. We've seen Forest bring in a lot of different forwards over the last couple of years. We know about the talent that they've got in the wings. They obviously brought in a Wanye, and his fitness has been a bit of an issue. And Chris Wood's just stepped up massively. And I think it's come at a really good time for him in his career. It felt like it was kind of petering out a little bit when Newcastle signed him. That was seen more of that was a transaction to stop Burnley from having him rather than to integrate him into their team more. Yeah. And Forest have really capitalised on that and found a player that was available that is a proven goal scorer. Like he knows where the goal is. He's a great finisher. I mean, he's got an international duty and scored again for New Zealand as well. So he's keeping that up really well. And Forest as a whole, they've just been fantastic. It's not a false position based on their performances at all. They look like they're dominating games. They're playing incredibly well. There's a lot of players in that squad you could have picked out. I mean, Alex Moreno that's gone on loan from Villa, he's been fantastic for him at left back. And looking at that squad and how it's building up now, Forest look like they should be able to sustain a good competitive season in the Premier League again now.
I guess the question is, can Chris Wood sustain the form he's shown before this international break, Dave? And I think that's the fear, isn't it? Forest have almost become quite dependent on his goals and his contributions, that would Awoniyi have the same impact as he had before Wood came back into the side. But I think on current evidence, he's got the experience definitely to kind of stay at that level, hasn't he?
Because I think, especially at the end of last season, he did get a little bit of stick for some gilt edge opportunities that he did miss that actually... fortunately, it didn't obviously come back to haunt Forest and the position they were in last year. But yeah, is it any coincidence having absolutely fabulous season? Danny Welbeck being one of them.
Yeah.
Raul Jimenez, who saw him coming back to his Fulham team, starting after Muniz obviously had the end to the season needed last year. He's forced himself back in and done extremely well the last few weeks. And Chris Wood, I think the experience that these players have. Clearly, I think it's guiding some of the younger players. And I mentioned those three teams there, teams full of youth and inexperience. I think it really does help them having that, them spearheading the attack and just having that kind of experience to score the goals.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because you say these players, these over 30s are coming back into not to fashion, but into form. But I think the number 9, generally, the focal point is coming back into fashion too quite a lot, isn't it? You've seen a few clubs reliant on that to finish off their chances, players cutting in from the wings and looking for a player in the middle. I think Arsenal is still yet to fully solve that problem, even though Havertz has been good at it. Haaland is now more in demand for City than he's ever been. If you take him out of the equation for City, where would they be this season? So yeah, Wood's kind of the poster boy of the number 9 and the finisher, who'd have thought? But on the opposite side of the spectrum, Myles, biggest surprise in a negative way. Which club, which player has stood out for you and you've thought to yourself, what is going on there?
I think towards the end of last season, we all started to get really excited about what Crystal Palace were doing. Glasner came in, had an immediate impact, brought a really clear style, and had that forward line of Mateta, Elise, and Eze just looking unplayable, really. And the way they've started this season has been really disappointing. They had some tough fixtures, but it seemed to get them in a bit of a rut. And actually, when you look back at the business over the summer, not much of it makes sense now on reflection. Obviously, losing Elise is always hard. They managed to hold on to Gahey, but sold Anderson. And that was a huge part of their defensive stability gone immediately. And they bring in Eddie Nketiah, who's a fantastic player, but a very different player to someone like Elise. And if you're still trying to keep that fluid front three, I don't see how Nketiah and Mateta work together as a two. So then do you put one of them slightly further out wide and replace Elise there? And that's not really worked. So it feels like they're being punished for quite poor business and a bit of a lack of style as well. And that's something that seemed the opposite when Glasner first got there. Then we all expected that to just keep getting better and better and better.
Yeah.
And instead, they look a shadow of the team they were at the end of last season, not helped by a lack of form or fitness from other players. Like Adam Wharton's obviously not hit the ground running the same way that he did when he came in January. But yeah, I worry about Palace. I don't look at them and think, right, you're going down. But they shouldn't be anywhere near that conversation. It looked like they were going to be the ones that were kind of knocking on the door of European places this year, and they're miles off that right now.
It's funny as well because Palace, we spoke about them in such glowing terms at the end of last season and talked about their potential for this season. Even if they lost at least one player, I think we all forecast that they'd lose one big player. Didn't quite think it'd be Elise, and we didn't quite think it'd be to the club he went to either. So that was a surprise. But you can see what Glasner is all about. You can see what he wants to do. We've seen the best of Palace when he's got the pieces in the right place, Dave. So are you concerned that his job is on the line, or is this just a case of Palace taking a step back for a season, a transitional season almost, isn't it?
It's a transition. I think they have lost that creativity from Elise, like Myles mentions. I think there is a little bit of imbalance there with Nketiah trying to make that work at the moment. I just feel as though it's been difficult, and even like the likes of Mateta, he scored a few goals this season, but he's not been firing on all cylinders like he was obviously at the end of last season especially. So you hope he's not going to be in trouble, and you hope he's given a little bit of time. And I think it looks like that's going to be the case. It looks like it's going to be the case at Wolves as well with O'Neill as well. So, I mean, who knows these days? Like we've seen the merry-go-round, haven't we, with managers before, and
Particularly at Palace as well.
Like he says, I think there's plenty there. There's plenty there to keep them up. We've said it before. There's been teams that have been too good to stay up, but I just think that there's plenty of talent there to turn it around.
Yeah, they've not become a bad team overnight. To stay up. No, true. But I think we were saying about that massive block of clubs in the middle of the table that could all kind of overtake each other with a couple of good runs, a couple of wins here and there. I think Palace could easily get out of trouble. And the optics of them being in the relegation zone during this international break, it's worse, isn't it? Because you've got a good couple of weeks stuck there looking at the table thinking, my club's in trouble. When actually, they've got a talented enough squad. We've seen how good some of their players are at their best. I don't doubt they'll turn it around. But yeah, the Premier League's just more competitive, really. I think they're just a victim of that. Even the promoted clubs, apart from obviously Southampton, have done slightly better than anticipated. Leicester and Ipswich, obviously, not in the relegation zone. So, yeah, it's been a weird season to judge so far, and Palace are so far the fall guys of that unpredictability in some ways, as well as the next team I'm going to talk about, and that's Manchester City and Phil Foden. I feel like City, obviously, we've seen how much injuries have impacted them, but Phil Foden's drop-off in form has been surprising, especially with the England team evolving and having different players playing in positions that he would normally play in too. He looks kind of less out of the England picture more out of the England picture rather than he ever has been. Are you surprised by the drop-off in Foden, Myles, after becoming player of the season last year?
It's a hard one to measure with him, isn't it? Because obviously he had that slow integration back into the City team at the start of the season, and that seemed to suggest that he just didn't have time to get up to the swing of things with them. And I think with City as a whole, you do wonder, 7 years of Guardiola, it's intense. And how many of them have it in them to keep doing it at that level, that consistently? We've kind of become almost numb to the idea that City will just keep going and keep winning. But yeah, they are human. Like, it's kind of nice to see that in a weird way. And I think Foden in particular, like, if you think about the amount of minutes he's had over the last few seasons and how quickly he's become such a key player for Man City at quite a young age still as well, it's a heavy responsibility. And obviously, like you say, player of the season last year, I think you would say a really disappointing summer, and he's kind of come back and replicated his England form rather than his Man City form. So it will take something to kind of get him going again. I think a run of time in the team and a bit more stability in the selection behind him will help that. I mean, Champions League-wise, he's looked far better than he has in the Premier League. We just need to see the consistent Phil Foden again. And that's still there, isn't it? It's not like a huge drop-off in his career at this point. I just think he looked battered, to be honest.
Maybe. There's a few players in that bracket as well, especially for City, who have just played so many minutes. And I do find myself kind of agreeing with Pep Guardiola's kind of rant, really, in some ways. There's too many matches for footballers, and it's finally catching up with City. And I feel like they've kind of staved it off for a long time. And I said that on the last pod, that every other club seems to have struggled with fitness and form at some point, and injuries especially. City have kind of succumbed to that only just. So they've been lucky, and I think Foden's been one of the beneficiaries of performing and being able to perform and play while the good times were rolling for City. But yeah, it is catching up with them. But it's interesting with England now and the new era under Tuchel. I think he'll drop straight back into England's plans. I think Tuchel will be quite pragmatic and start playing him again because he's one of the proven performers. But we will talk about England in a moment. So I'll give you a chance, Dave, to say who you think your biggest surprise is in a negative way. Who player or club have you looked at and thought, why are they doing so badly?
I think after such a great start to the season last year, I think we all wanted to see what Maddison could do at a club like Spurs. And I think it's just, I still wanted to know what his level was, because it felt like there was another gear he could go into. I think at the end, obviously at Leicester, it didn't end great for him, but he's been one of those players, creativity-wise, he's superb, and I still think there's more there, but I just don't know. I don't know if we're ever going to see it on a consistent level with him. This season, Spurs have blown hot and cold. They've gone from one extreme to the other, like we've seen them, over the years. But it just feels like he is one of those experienced heads now. He really should be spearheading that attack and obviously assisting Son really in that sort of role to be really I think pulling them through these performances and turning games around when they're obviously up against. It just really seems like he's finding it difficult there, I think, at times.
Yeah, I mean, it always seemed like a stylistic match made in heaven, didn't it? James Maddison and Tottenham. Whoever was the coach at the time, it felt like it would still work. He's the kind of player that Tottenham have normally kind of celebrated and supported and had a platform for. And at his best, Maddison has performed brilliantly, hasn't he, for Spurs, Myles? But not quite this season. Is that because Spurs have struggled? He's been a victim of that? Or do you think his drop-off in form is almost like a reason why Spurs are struggling?
I think the difficulty is, and I think you're right, at the time it felt like, yeah, that's a Spurs kind of player. He'll be really good for that sort of level. But actually, I think it's the worst club for him in many ways with Ange's current style, because he is quite a luxury player. That creativity and what he wants to achieve in a game is fantastic, but you need to be able to facilitate having him in your team and not losing control of your midfield. And Spurs don't seem to be able to do that with him in it. And it's come at the same time as Kulusevski's kind of taken the forefront of the creative responsibility, and he's been excellent just behind the striker there as well. So it's almost frozen Maddison out, because the physicality of someone like Kulusevski means that you can still achieve the high press that Ange wants to, whereas Maddison does seem to struggle with that. And actually, you wonder if he would be better in a team almost like Chelsea in the kind of Cole Palmer role, where you've got the legs behind you and you can just be there to kind of pull the strings, whereas Spurs don't feel like their midfield is stable enough to accommodate someone like Maddison right now. Yeah. I don't even necessarily think it's that he's in poor form. I just think systemically, Spurs are always going to do that to a player like him right now. Like they're just nowhere near a point where they can afford that level of luxury, because Ange is so stubborn with that style that rather than adapt it to the squad that he's got, he's willing to let them be 10th and just be that hot and cold team. I really think it's a problem for them. So I wonder how long Maddison stays at Spurs, whether we see another manager come in and all of a sudden he becomes their marquee player, or whether he disappears a la Dele Alli and we see that kind of road for him instead. I don't know what to expect of James Maddison. It would be a shame if that was the case, because technically he's fantastic, isn't he? He's so good on the ball.
Great player.
He just needs someone and a club
that's going to appreciate that. It looks like he's lost a bit of confidence there. He's lacking that kind of confidence. You
would if you keep getting hooked at half time to solidify your midfield. And like there's a couple of games, isn't there, where when he's come off, Spurs have done better because ultimately they've played with a midfield instead of trying to attack with 6 players. So if you think about how advanced Spurs play their fullbacks, and then Kulusevski, and then Brennan Johnson, and then Son or Richarlison, whoever's on the left. If you drop Maddison into that equation as well, it's too much.
Yeah,
you can't sustain that. So it feels like he needs to pick his moments, really, and whether Spurs is the right one for him.
Who do you think, Myles, based on what you've seen so far, is a club that you're really fearing for? Because you've mentioned Crystal Palace already as a big surprise in a negative way. But obviously you don't fear for them. Is there any clubs that you're looking at and thinking they are precariously close to sliding here?
There's 2 that come to mind. The 2 W's, either West Ham or Wolves, really. And it's funny because at the start of the season when we did our predictions, I talked West Ham up a lot. And how I thought they were going to be kind of high achievers with Lopetegui. It looked like they'd done some good business. And instead, just nothing's clicked for them at all. And when you've got players like Mohamed Kudus, who tore the league up last year and was being talked about as moving on to a bigger club and was going to be their kind of marquee player this year when they managed to hold on to him. And we've seen 2 goals, no assists, and now a long suspension from him. It just feels like no one there kind of has their head in the game a little bit. It's unfortunate that they've had some injuries and they had a really difficult start to the season. But now you think, where do they pick this up from? Because they've gone for Lopetegui after Moyes, and that's not working. Their last kind of identified target was Amorim before that, and now he's obviously not going to be available for them. I don't really know what West Ham want to achieve, and the squad's going to be quite disjointed with the amount of signings they're making if they do change managers. And how many times have we seen that with West Ham? They go out, sign 9 players with a new coach. It doesn't work. They get rid of the coach, bring someone in to save them, and then that style that they were trying to build is just gone. And those signings have kind of become pointless. And it feels like they're kind of slipping into that trap again, which is unfortunate.
They've invested heavily in him, haven't they? Lopetegui as a coach. And that needs to pay off, I think. And that will probably dictate what they do next. And I guess the question, Dave, is for West Ham, what is considered a failure of a season? Because we knew what West Ham fans were thinking about how high, in hindsight, David Moyes got the team. They still weren't happy. But surely they're not happy with, first of all, the football they're playing at the minute, but the league position too. So what is a good league position for West Ham, and what is considered a sackable league position for them, do you think?
I think at the minute a good position would be mid-table. If we're considering, how they're performing. I agree. I think Myles, you pointed them out as to be probably one of the surprises of the season. I think with some of the additions that they've made and some of the talent that they've got in there. I just think it's such a surprise for me. I think of how easy they are to open up, because defensively they've got some very good players in there, some very good defensive-minded players, and it's actually a similar case for the two teams at the bottom there, Wolves and West Ham. It's just chaotic at times, it really is, and I think it's just about solving that issue. It's just the transitions in games, it's just too easy for them, and it looks like as well players are just labouring back. Like
yeah, that's true.
There's no energy at all, and I think that's the concerning thing for me. Mid-table, if they can make a recovery, but it is looking worrying. I will say that. I think in terms of the managers that are, at threat down there at the moment, I think you could probably say Lopetegui is probably favourite to go first.
Yeah, arguably. Well, I was going to ask you what your club that you're fearing for is. If not West Ham, then who, Dave? Is it a club with a manager who's next on the line as well?
Yeah, it's another one who I think probably there'd be a few people that's still surprised that he's there. And I think Wolves have been so entertaining to watch this season, to be fair, but not for the right reasons sometimes. I'm sure Wolves fans will definitely agree with that. So many goals in games, it's back and forth, but it's just, again, it's chaos defensively all over the show at times, and it does make you worry because there's so much talent within that squad that they should be doing so much better. And I think that's the way that probably the boards will be looking at it, really, is that I don't think they're under threat in terms of going down, but I worry more for Gary O'Neill and his position, I think, at the club, because for me, like some of the players that they've got, like Mateus Cunha, I think he's one of the best attacking players to watch in the league. Class. He's absolutely outstanding, and the way he's come on, I think, in the last year, he'll be definitely attracting a few suitors, I think. So they should be doing so much better. And for me, I think they're quite a bit of a disappointment this season.
Well, this is where the board need to decide whether to stick or twist, isn't it, really? Because with O'Neill, if they'd have had a different set of fixtures to start the season and maybe had 5 or 6 games that were a bit more pleasant than what they did have, which was a horrendous run to start the season with, wasn't it? Would the optics have been any better? Would they have performed any better? Who knows? But is he a victim of just having a difficult fixture list, do you think, so far, Gary O'Neill, Myles? Or do you think it's just basically a cocktail of no recruitment, no backing of the manager and everything else that goes with that?
More so that, definitely. I think their summer was so poor. Losing Kilman, losing Neto, not really establishing any more core players to that group. You've got some players coming through that look much better, but ultimately that squad is weak. He had a good season last year. I don't know if we've seen enough to make us think that he's an excellent Premier League manager. So if you've got a poor group of players and a kind of unproven manager with a board that aren't backing you and a difficult fixture run, that's probably going to land you in a bit of trouble, isn't it? And that feels like where Wolves are at.
Yeah, well, I've got Everton as my club. I say that with reluctance, really, because, again, I thought they'd be comfortable this season, and they've won two games, one out of 11, which is shocking form for a club that are looking to kind of kick on and get mid-table at least. I always feel like Everton are a couple of injuries away from disaster, and they are so unpredictable and inconsistent and reliant on 2 or 3 players that I worry for them having that injury blip, or, again, we've said they're quite a streaky team. Either they're really, really good or they go on really, really bad runs. They started this season terribly as well, and they're still suffering from that. So for me, I think Everton, one of those clubs that I've got relegation coming at some point, and the fans are going to hate me for that because they've got this new stadium on the horizon and potential takeover, but it feels like they've been staving it off for so long that they probably need a bit of a reset. It helps some clubs, doesn't it? But I think Everton are one of those clubs that can't seem to kick on and sweep the decks of any players that don't belong there. And I think there are a few of those at Everton too. Do you agree, Myles?
I do, and any Everton fans that are getting excited about their takeover, just go and have a look how Roma are getting on right now.
Yeah.
You've got Serie A as tight as it's ever been, and Roma down in 12th on their 3rd manager of the season already. It's ridiculous. So that there'll be an interesting ownership to kind of come in and take the reins, won't they? Yeah, it's a funny one with Everton. I never know whether this is a surprise or what I worry for, because it's just par for the course. It feels like that spell that Villa had, where it was inevitable we were going to go down eventually. Sunderland had it, but they escaped it. It was inevitable they're going to go down eventually. It feels like it might just be Everton's sort of time soon. I think they'll be okay this season based on the fact that I think there'll be 3 teams with lower points totals than them, not based on the fact that I think that they'll be necessarily amazing. But they've got a few players that are actually having pretty decent seasons, and that it looks like every now and again the way that they perform on the pitch, they've got things clicking in areas that they didn't have last year. Like the performance levels are definitely higher, but they're still not getting results. And that's the most worrying thing, that even if you are kind of tipping to your peak and then not winning games, that's a problem.
Yeah, big problem. Dave, I'm going to get your take quickly on Everton before we move on to player of the season so far. You can't say too much really against your ginger brother in Sean Dyche. So are you supporting the manager in this case, or do you think he's part of the problem? What is the problem at Everton?
Yeah, where do you start? I just think, to be honest, I'll give them some praise. I think they've made a couple of good additions. I think Ndiaye, I think he's showed quite a bit of promise and probably been one of their better attacking players at times. The likes of, it's the usual candidates that are showing up for them, isn't it? Like McNeil, he's having a great season as well.
Yes.
Been really impressed with him, but it's great to see they've got a bit of stability there. Like, they've got a few players in there who've been in and around the club for quite a while, and I think that will help them. I think Branthwaite coming back in is such a timely return to that defence, because they really did struggle early on in the season. But the manager, I don't think you can put him at fault too much, to be honest. Well, what he's got to work with there, I think he's done really well. And even in those really difficult periods, he's been able to turn it around, and there's not been any panic there. I think even at the times when I think really Everton fans should be a little bit grateful for the job that he's done, and through this sort of period of turmoil that they've been going through. It's been an absolute shambles, really. I'd say he's done a commendable job, and who knows whether he's the long-term solution for it. But hopefully he gets a bit of a crack of it, and if this new ownership comes in and the Don's like better than the last, fingers crossed, then he gets the opportunity, and that's sort of the foundations there to assist him in taking the club back to sort of where they feel they should be.
We're going to wrap up the Premier League look back so far after 11 games with player of the season contenders up to this point. And it's an interesting thing to think about, purely because I think it's been this season of team morale and team cohesion, and the best teams seem to be the ones that are doing the best in the league rather than relying on standout individuals. So it is more difficult, I think, to find a standout player of the season. But have a go, Myles. Who are you going for?
I'm actually going for Moises Caicedo at Chelsea. I think there was a time where that was looking like a bit of a flop signing last year. And then this year with Maresca there, he's dominated their midfield along with Lavia, and they've looked so much more stable because of it. It feels like the amount of attacking talent Chelsea have is unleashed because they are a lot more stable in the middle of the park. And the numbers Caicedo's putting up and his overall contributions in game are fantastic. I think he's second for duels won in the Premier League so far this season, first for tackles, 7th for interceptions, 7th for winning the ball in the middle of the park, and that's 5th for through balls. So he's breaking play up from the opposition and bringing the ball forward and helping his team move in a more aggressive manner. And that's exactly what Chelsea signed him for. That's the sort of player we saw at Brighton. And now I don't think there are many midfielders that are competing with him in the league right now. I mean, you look at a couple of the Liverpool players that they'd be worth a shout as well. Salah obviously has been fantastic. I think Gravenberch is having an excellent season so far. But I think none of us expected Chelsea to be where they are right now. And I think a huge part of it is moving Enzo Fernandez out and bringing Caicedo in. I think he's been fantastic.
I think that kind of contrasting, obviously their fees has made both players under scrutiny, both Enzo Fernandez and Moises Caicedo. And I think to see the almost ruthless approach of Enzo Maresca in picking one over the other, because he realised that they didn't work together very well, has been testament to Caicedo's importance, I think, and the role he plays. Like you said, he is very much an all-round contributor to that midfield and that forward play. So yeah, impressive and justifying a fee finally, I think, and a player with like a really high ceiling. I don't think Caicedo has shown the best of himself yet. I think that's still to come. So yeah, exciting for him. Dave, who have you gone for player of the season so far? Who stood out for you?
Going to continue the trend of keeping the focus on the clubs below the top six, and this is one that I think a player who's had so much talent, but I think he got a lot of stick early on in his career about not being clinical enough and not finishing chances. But I think Danny Welbeck at Brighton so far this season has been remarkable, really. We mentioned about the amount of experienced strikers doing so well this season. But I think the numbers that he's put up, I think that's 6 goals now and 2 assists in 11 Premier League matches, which is great for him. And I think really just seeing how Brighton are performing with him spearheading that attack, and some of the teams that have been in the season, which we've spoken in the previous weeks, Mike, I think it's just amazing to see.
Taking the pressure off Evan Ferguson as well, and kind of mentoring me at the same time. Yeah, fair shout. I think that's been a similar role, obviously at a different level, for Mo Salah, who's clearly the standout pick so far for player of the season, and I concur with that kind of almost reluctantly. Liverpool are doing so well; it's difficult to see as a United fan, but they're playing a different brand of football under Arne Slot, and I think the importance of Mo Salah to whatever Liverpool play and to whatever guys they come under has been highlighted even more now. And I think, was it 14 goal contributions in 11 games? That's a standout figure for any player, let alone one that people were looking at as potentially leaving the club very soon and might be at the end of his career and like slowing down a bit. He's lost a bit of pace, but not a huge amount. I think he's more than made up for it in his vision, his reading of the game, his intelligence. And this could be Salah's best season, Myles, I think, in some ways. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think the fact that he seemed to have a bit of a rocky relationship with Klopp at times, and the emergence of the Saudi League and the money that they were going to throw at players, we all kind of expected Salah to be kind of on his last legs at Liverpool, but there's nothing to suggest that physically he is. Like he's still performing at the very, very top level, and the fact that Liverpool are where they are in the league, the whole team is operating at a very high level, of course, but Salah is undoubtedly the player that they need the most. He's been sensational. I think the fact that he still has that break of pace on the counter, the fact that he's built a connection with a variety of forwards now, because Liverpool do rotate that forward line a lot more these days. He seems to just be the most integral part of that, and there's no surprise there, is there?
No, not at all. And I think whatever Liverpool do, it will be dependent on him maintaining that in some ways, because we've seen someone like Darwin Núñez is literally hit and miss, isn't he? So it might be all on his shoulders, but I think he's ready for it, Mo Salah. I think he's become that figurehead and that kind of mentor of that team, and it feels right that any success is down to him in some ways. Shall we dwell on England? It is international break. It'd be rude not to. Lee Carsley's obviously finished his tenure with England now. In his words, he felt relief at the end of it. I think we all did, to be fair, because it was the unknown until Tuchel was announced, really, wasn't it? That we didn't know what direction England were going to take. But we've seen Carsley play a lot of players that wouldn't have probably got minutes under Gareth Southgate. Lots of debuts, lots of first goals for players like Angel Gomez and Noni Madueke. Jared Bowen scoring as well the other night. Ollie Watkins playing a more prominent role, I think, balancing out the appearances with Harry Kane. So there's a few conversations to be had about what the Tuchel era will look like and which players potentially that Carsley seemed to kind of get quite a lot out of that you wouldn't have expected might be continuing once Tuchel arrives in the hot seat. So I'll go for you, Dave, first. What do you think of the players that have been introduced, or are there any players that you think have actually become better under Lee Carsley that might still be key players once Tuchel comes around?
I think the transition to seeing some of these younger players has been really good. I think the introduction, like you mentioned there, of Angel Gomez, Anthony Gordon's been given more of an opportunity as well, and to see him score the other night and take his goal really well was great to see. And I think actually it will help a lot of the players, and ironically in the international break, there's a couple of players who've taken their opportunity. Ollie Watkins being one of them, and great to see Jared Bowen get a goal, both having a little bit of a difficult time at their club, so that will probably kick-start their restart when they go back to the Premier League. And you mentioned obviously the likes of Harwood Bellis, brilliant moment for him to score, on his debut, the stuff of dreams. It'll be interesting to see who stays in and around the squad. I think there's a few candidates there. Potential. I think the likes of Livramento, I really like him as a player. I think he's got a lot of talent, and there's definitely areas, I think, particularly those fullback positions, I think we're probably asking for someone Definitely. To announce themselves really now. With, you look at the likes of Kieran Trippier on the way out, Kyle Walker's obviously at the back end of his career as well. I think there is an opportunity there for some players.
Yeah, a bit of a changing of the guard, wasn't it, Myles, in some ways, this last few games? But it's lucky in some ways there was very little jeopardy in this Nations League group, despite obviously losing to Greece. That was a bit of a shock, but it always felt like it was just a blip, and so it proved. Carsley's relieved, but how are you feeling about his time, and what players do you think it will probably get a crack at playing for England more regularly now?
I think the whole thing has made me feel a bit weird about England, if I'm totally honest. Even as he left, some of the players' comments about it were really odd. I think both Bellingham and Grealish talked about how Carsley had brought the smile back to them when they were playing for England. And that seemed weird. It didn't seem like... I thought the whole point of the old England camp was that everyone was really happy to be there. And then all of a sudden it's like they clearly hated what was going on in the summer then, didn't they? So I don't know. England seem like they're in a funny place. I think when you look at a squad where they've had 8 players drop out as well, that never looks good, True. Does it? You call 8 players up that then drop out injured. That's nonsense. They'll all play for their club the first game back. And you wonder if the momentum of England and the kind of happiness around the camp that we had that got us to deep ends of tournaments is starting to go, and how Tuchel will look to kind of shape that. But no, I don't know. The good thing is there are young players coming through in key positions that we can look forward to. I mean, for me, selfishly, obviously it's great to see Morgan Rogers get his call up and get some minutes as well. I think the conversation about how often Harry Kane should be playing for England is really interesting. I'll be honest,
agreed.
I don't understand it. I think as long as Kane's fit, he starts for England. I mean, look at his club form. I don't think there seems to be a conversation when Kane plays for England that he's getting old, he's past it, and we need to move him on. Why is he performing incredibly well for one of the best teams in Europe every single week? Then, I think it's a nonsense conversation. But what's good is we have seen that there are options. Like Watkins took his chance the other day. Solanke came on in the Ireland game as well. So there are players around that can do it. And like Dave mentioned, looking at the fullbacks, players like Lewis Hall and Rico Lewis, they look like they could be England fullbacks for a really long time. And that's what we need, really, because it's weird. It felt like we were in this position where we had an excessive amount of fullbacks and all of a sudden turned to having none. So these players will be the ones that really look to stand out. So we'll see how Tuchel gets on with them.
I agree with what you were saying about options. I think that's the thing that this like tenure under Carsley has brought, that we do have options in places that Southgate almost made it feel like we didn't, and like he chose players so often in certain positions, and you're thinking, well, he's a proven player in that position and he's done well in World Cups for us in the past. I'm talking about the likes of Kieran Trippier. Yet at fullback we've got players that are more than capable of doing that in a natural position of theirs as well, and there's options there. Angel Gomez has been a big win for me. He's a midfielder who we have no one else like. And I think Man United will be all over him when his contract runs out at Lille, because he's the kind of player that United could do within the middle as well. So options there. Ollie Watkins is an alternative to Harry Kane. And I don't think it's an either or for them. It's a situational thing for England. Which player fits the opposition the best? And we saw Watkins do that in the Euros brilliantly with his absolute worldie of a goal off the bench. He can do that against the right opposition quite comfortably in a way that Kane can't really replicate. So, yeah, 2 very different options, but options nonetheless. Madueke instead of Saka. I always thought we were so reliant on Saka, but seeing what Madueke could be is impressive as well. So, yeah, I think thank Carsley really for opening people's eyes to players that he knew could do well from the under-21s. Given them a chance, and they've proven on the whole that they can do it at the senior level as well. So I think it's a positive camp from Carsley. And my fear for Tuchel is that he will revert to almost Southgate-like pragmatism and play the favourites again, because he's only there for one tournament and his kind of objective is to win the World Cup. So he's only going to do that with players he knows are going to perform for him. So I think there'll be very little room for experimentation for Tuchel, and that bothers me a little bit. I want to win, of course, we all do, but these young players have all kind of proven that they can do it. It'd be good to see him experiment a little bit still when he first gets in. Do you think that's likely, Dave?
I think it'll be. It's just fascinating, isn't it, really? It's the end of an era and into a new one now, and I think knowing what he is like as a manager, it'll be interesting to see who he's earmarked, I think, really, as his starters. I think there'll be players.
He's going to get Eric Dyer back.
Big step back if he does.
I don't know about that. I think there is a solid base there. We know roughly, if every player is available, probably what the starting 11 will be. But again, it's about what he's looking to achieve as boss, and what sort of system he's going to set up with. I mean, if he goes with three at the back and 2 wing backs, I mean, that'll be interesting to see what players do. Whether Trent obviously does start at that right wing back position. And, there's so many questions, and I think next time an international break comes around, I think we'll be looking forward to it a little bit more than we probably have the last couple. We've been dreading them.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to end the pod there because, you won't have to hear us talk about England or internationals for a while now. Full-on Premier League from here on in. So thank you guys for joining us back on this pod. And Myles, great to see you again. But please do, while you're here, like, subscribe and follow us on YouTube and every social channel. We are at Football Diary UK on most socials. And we're now on Blue Sky. I think as many people are, they're making that migration. So please do find us on there. We are at footballdiarypodcast.com. That is our handle. And all of our handles will be on that channel as well. So do follow us on Blue Sky and interact there. Please do follow us and please do join us. And until next time, guys, I will see you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Pleasure.